Welcome back to Power Lunch. We've been telling you about efforts by the government to seize businessman Ira Rennert's sprawling 100,000 square foot home in New York's Hamptons. Rennert is accused of failing to make good on hundreds of millions of dollars in pensions promised to a group of steelworkers. The property in question is the largest private residence in America, valued at more than $160 million. Here to tell us about the home and some of the controversy surrounding Mr. Rennert is dlenz with Prudential, Douglas Elliman. She is the #1 broker in the country. And Stephen Gaines, author of 2 best-selling books on New York's wealthiest neighborhoods, Philistines at the Hedgerow and The Sky's the Limit. Welcome to both of you. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank
Hi,
you.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. This is quite the story and quite intriguing depending on how it plays out. Stephen, let me start with you. You chronicle the Hamptons, certainly. It seems as though this story is more than just the pension story. I mean, Mr. Rennert's building of this estate has been mired in controversy since the very beginning, has it not?
It was a very unpopular project, mostly because of its size. I mean, there was some competition between the rich people. It was kind of parvenu versus parvenu. But people were really concerned about the size of the house. It seemed enormous even by Hampton standards. We couldn't figure out what he wanted to do with 29 bedrooms if he wasn't going to turn it into a hotel or a convention center. So the neighbors got together and sued him to try to stop it. And of course they weren't able to. So he's taken this perfectly gorgeous potato field and turned it into his little private domain.
But, Dolly, could you not argue that a number of other very wealthy Americans, perhaps not on that scale, but, I mean, that a lot of them have bought up farmland in that particular area of the Hamptons and elsewhere and made their own private domains as well?
Yeah, it seems to be the financial capital of the world. Every one of his neighbors is someone you've heard of in finance. It's amazing.
So do you view this as if you put the pension part of the story aside, Dolly, is it kind of a competition between old money versus new money versus money gotten in a different way, or is it more than that?
No, I think it's almost all new money versus new money, and home and what's going on in that to that extent. I just think this whole pension story, adds an interesting spin to it.
Mm-hmm. Does it, do you think, make others in that area who perhaps have holdings in some of these other companies a little nervous?
Not really, because I think they would love to have this house not exist as a private home in the sense that it now does. So I think it would almost make them all happy.
Stephen, what about that? I mean, what if this does go through, and although the odds are low that this particular house would be taken, it's not out of the question. But then I guess the question for his neighbors is, what's the government going to do with it, or what's the PBGC going to do with it? What about that element of uncertainty?
I think people will be lining up at the door to try to buy this house at a lower rate. And one thing that could be done, I'm sure Dolly would agree with this, is you can subdivide that land. You could keep the main mansion, and then you could build 2 or 3 other mansions and make even more than $180 million. I think the problem is Sagaponack was a hamlet that was just a part of the town of Southampton, and the people were so angry about the size of Rennert's house that they've now incorporated Sagaponack so they can stop houses of this size. And I don't think it's about jealousy either. I think that people were suspicious that Mr. Rennert was going to open some sort of a convention center. Mm-hmm. He has a tremendous interest in Israel, and the fact that there was going to be a 200-car underground garage, which there is now, plus 29 bedrooms, each with their own washer and dryer, made people very suspicious about what the real use of that house was going to be. On top of that, now that he's built the house, nobody's ever been invited for dinner, and that's the worst thing you can do in the Hamptons.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
So
I mean,
I
it's a social, it's a group of social elite, but it's a small group in that particular part of the Hamptons. Dolly, what about that? Is there any way for him to not make amends necessarily, but to smooth things over if indeed the pension side of the story goes away?
I'm not sure he really wants to. There's always a way to make amends, but I don't think he hasn't really been forthcoming from what I understand, so I don't believe that's his interest. But I do have the buyer for the house if it comes back on.
Care to share that person's name with us?
Another big titan who would love to have this property, who's actually bidding on a huge tract of land now that Stephen is well aware of, in order to make another huge and wonderful property.
Any particular...
If anybody can...
Go ahead.
If anybody can sell the house, it would be Dolly.
Well, Dolly's the #1 broker.
Sold, yes, the next biggest house in the Hamptons, Burnt Point, I think, for 45 or 55 million. Or 75 million, Dolly? I forget.
You know, but Dolly, this person who's interested in this house and is building this other estate, any clue as to what particular part of industry this person is from?
Purely financial, you know, hedge fund.
It usually is.
Exactly.
Stephen, what about that? Any guesses on your part as to who it might be?
No, you know, there's so much money in the Hamptons. Everybody is so enormously wealthy. There's unfathomable wealth. I mean, it just goes beyond what anybody would believe. We've stopped counting millionaires a long time ago. We only count billionaires now in the Hamptons. So, and it really doesn't matter, actually, anymore who is buying the land, as long as they have respect for the land that they are buying, because the reason why everybody came to the Hamptons in the first place, the great beauty, the rolling potato fields out to the ocean, are almost gone. So these people don't even know why they're buying houses there, because they've already destroyed what was its most unique attribute.
Dolly, I'd be remiss, being the #1 broker in the country, not to ask you about a possible housing bubble, but I don't know if that even applies in the neck of the woods that you sell property in.
Well, it would apply probably in any neck of the woods, but I honestly don't see any housing bubble. Everything that comes on the market sells, you know, absorbs in a proper period of time, and marketed properly, everything will be fine.
On that note, thank you both. It was great to talk with you. Dolly Dlenz with Prudential Douglas Elliman, and Stephen Gaines, author of The Sky's the Limit and Philistines at the Hedgerow.
I guarantee you that's the longest amount of time that Dolly's gone without her phone ringing.
Well, it probably was on silent.
I hope it was.